Okay, it's gonna be a few more seconds. I'm setting up the meeting. Oh, there's Cindy. Okay. We are live. Buenas tardes. Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to our first afternoon panel. It's a panel that will be mostly in English. And we have my talented and generous colleague, Gaby Meyer, who's going to be moderating this panel. Just one word for our in-person audiences. We have coffee, we have pan de bonos, we have chocolate, and for our live streamed audiences, just a reminder that there will be somewhere sometime, and that you will also have the chance of seeing Paulo and Cindy later at the round table. Camila unfortunately cannot be there. Gaby, thank you so much.
Thank you, Felipe, and hello everyone. I'm Felipe's colleague in modern languages, and it's my honor to present our panelists for today. So the first speaker is Camila Núñez Bergsnyder. Camila is a historian with a master's degree in art history. Her main interest is comic studies, focusing on comic books and graphic novels that proposed an alternative approach to history, memory, and the construction of individual and collective identities. She is a Spanish literature PhD student at the University of Iowa, where she also teaches. And her talk today is entitled The Vortex, graphic novel from 2016, adaptation of literary works into the comics medium.
Oh, should I say something?
Yes, I think you could just take over, Camila.
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't sure what I was supposed to. Thank you so much for your presentation, Gaby. Okay, let me just check some stuff here. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, are you seeing my screen? Yes, great. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're doing well, especially my fellow students and fellow teachers. We are in the final lap of the semester, which is always challenging. So I hope everyone is doing way better than I am right now. Thank you so much for being here, willing to listen to what I have to say. As Gaby said, my name is Camila Núñez. I'm part of the Spanish Literature's PhD at the University of Iowa. I'm also a Spanish instructor at the Spanish and Portuguese department of the same institution. And today I'm going to be talking, okay, let me just close the other windows. Let me put these right here. I think it's the best choice. Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about adaptation to the comics medium of La Vorágine, The Vortex, by Colombian author José Luis, José Rivera, José Eustacio Rivera. And the adaptation, it's called The Vortex graphic novel, or La Vorágine novela gráfica, by Oscar Pantoja and José Luis Jiménez. I titled the presentation Adaptation of Literary Works into the Comics Medium. And I think that it will be very pertinent to start with context of the novel and the graphic novel and some other important information. I consider it will be great for you to have. So context. Jose Eustacio Rivera was born in Colombia in 1888, and he died tragically in New York in 1938, trying to translate his novel to English. He was a lawyer and an author. I think he ran for the Senate and lose. And he was also legal secretary of the Colombo-Venezuelan Border Commission, meaning that he knew a lot of Colombia's rural areas, especially on the east part of the country. So he traveled a lot in in that period in which he worked for the border commission. So he knew face to face what it meant to be in the rural and more like natural part of the country. So his experience in this job is part of La Voragine, the vortex. And it's not like someone from the city writing about the jungle or the rainforest or whatever. It's someone who was there and who was mainly disappointed by the way in which the country, the government, treated the places in Colombia that were not like urban or considered um, cities. Um, okay, so sorry, I was reading a message about uh, talking louder. Are you listening me? Are you listening to me? See, bien. Okay, so during the okay, sorry. Before I was distracted by the message, but I'm okay now. During the late 19th century and the early 20th century, there was a phenomenon known as the rubber boom in the Amazon rainforest. So during this period, international companies went to the Amazonas rainforest to exploit nature and the native people for the liquid that can be transformed into solid rubber, uh, widely used in the automobile industry, among other enterprises. So if we remember our history classes or whatever, you'll remember that Ford was building a lot of cars by this time. So there was a high demand of rubber for that industry and others. So the vortex or La Voragine followed the adventures and the path leading to madness and misfortune that Arturo Coa, the main character, and Alicia, her pregnant mistress, follow. Other characters join the couple in their travel, leaving behind the urban territory as they get entangled in the inclement depths of nature, barely modified by human hands. So, in this narration, nature is basically, I know it's kind of cliche saying this, but it's another character, a merciless character in which they get entangled, as I say. The narration begins with Koa and Alicia running away from Bogota to avoid the social sanctions of their affair. First, they escape to the Casanare region in the tropical grassland, or Los Llanos, and then they end up in the Amazonas region of Colombia, territory where the rubber boom enslaved native people from the Bora, Huitoto, and Andoque cultures, and among other souls who ended up suffering a lot in this process of obtaining rubber. So, now here is the super attractive cover of the Pantojas and Jimenez Voragine. So as you can assume, this is Arturo Coa, and this will be Alicia, her pregnant mistress. And now some context about the graphic novel adaptation. So Jose Luis Jimenez has worked with his brother in other media like movies, musical videos, and also comics. And one of them is Los Once, the other one is El Salado, and both of them are comics with a historical context. Um, so those two comics explore, as I said, historical events from Colombia. Jimenez has shown a particular interest in developing graphic novels projects related to historical topics, testimony, and memory. By the other hand, Pantoja has worked as a writer um, for different biographies of male authors belonging to the modern Latin American canon, like Garcia Marquez, Borges, and Rulfo, La Voragine, and Jose Eustacio Rivera also are part of this canon, literary canon. Pantoja has also published two other adaptations or versions, Tanta Sangre Vista, which is originally a novel by oh my god, I forgot the name. Rafael Baena. The original novel was published in 15, and he also published a parody of Kafka's Metamorphosis, meaning that the Vortex graphic novel is not his first experience in adapting literary works to the medium of comics. I'm going to proceed to analyze key images for two of my main arguments in the study of Pantoja's and Jimenez's Vortex, o La Vorágine. So one of the most captivating elements of their adaptation are the detailed illustrations that completely capture Rivera's complex descriptions of the environment of the Casanare and Amazonas region. Jimenez successfully translates the sublime sensation of being surrounded by something that is both wonderful and overwhelming. First, I would like to observe how nature's suffering is visually represented by Jimenez. I think this is like the strongest element from their version of the vortex or La Vorágine. Okay, so this is one of my favorite images, definitely from the comic. This image is part of the opening of the first part of the graphic novel. As we can see, faces with expressions of discomfort, to say the least, are formed with the figures from top of the trees. This image foreshadows the destiny of Arturo Cova and his companions. For the very beginning, nature and suffering are molten. In the next image, I also like this image a lot. It's like from a cover of a metal album or something like that. So in this image, a human skull transforms into just another element of an environment that critters and vegetation reigned. A human who once had agency, wishes, interests, and the capacity to decide and act has been consumed and assimilated by Earth's overwhelming power. Tortured bodies merge with wounded rubber trees. In the amalgam of human and plant suffering, these two images stand out. The markings that the two beings share are the same and inflicted by the same perpetrator, the rubber boom, or all the humans, all the colonizers that have to do with this phenomenon. So I would like to stop briefly in this image because I like it a lot. I think it's like one of the top moments of the graphic novel, and I would like to stop here to share with you these couple of images of previous covers of the novel, not the graphic novel, the novel. As you can see, it's very similar. You can tell that Jose Luis Jimenez probably saw these images and translated them to his version of La Vorágine. So the way in which you have to cut the tree for the liquid that the rubber liquid is that you have to do some cuts diagonally so it can bleed the rubber. So the same happens with the native people who were enslaved and tortured. So the wounds of the trees and of the human beings became the same. So they melt, they not melt, they mold, and their suffering is exactly the same in this image. This other image is contains something related to Clemente Silva, another main protagonist of the second part of Rivera's novel. He was also enslaved in the rubber boom business, and he marks the trees with his name because he's searching for his son, who was another victim of false promises. So this actually happened. It happens in the novel, but actually happened. So the big bosses from the rubber boom promised money and other benefits to people who were going to work for them. So they told them, like, if you come to me to the Amazonas, you're going to be rich. We pay you, I don't know, certain amount of money for that. And it was all lies. So they basically became enslaved, not only Native American people. So he is a person who has a really bad luck and it just keeps searching for his son and keeps marking the trees, the rubber trees, and all the trees that are around him to um, leave a mark and an evidence that he was there and that he was suffering while he was searching for his kid. So, okay, that will be it for the nature part. I'm sorry, I wish I could have more time to talk about um, this research I made, but it's 20 minutes, right? Okay, how much I have left? What? 2 minutes? Really? Oh my God. Oh, so very quickly, to Arturo confronted the Vortex graphic novel as fan fiction. So there's a lot of changes that Pantoja and Jimenez made to the main character. So I made some rough translations, but I'm going to get to the point because I have like seconds left, probably. So okay. The ending of the graphic novel is the most controversial change made to Kowa's characterization. It's really different. It's two different characters, opposite, I will say. Kowa gives his life to, super spoilers for everyone who has not read La Voragine. Kowa gives his life to guarantee that Alicia, their son, and the rest of the characters survive. Kowa's last words are, this moment is connected to the beginning. Oh, wait. Where are Kowa's last? Kowa's last words are, I want to fight back like the animal I've been, but my strength is leaving. It's only the idea of fighting back deep calm takes. But before, he says, live with my son and Alicia, find somewhere to hide. I'm going to buy you some time. I'll join you later. So this moment is connected to the beginning of the comic. That's another big change. So the original beginning of La Voragine is, before I felt passion for any woman, I gambled my heart and violence won it. And Pantoja changed it to, before I fell in love, I gambled my heart and violence won. So it's very different from Rivera's main characterization of Koa. So is there a better motivation to sacrifice your life than love for your partner and child? So in Pantoja's version, Koa is not selfish. Koa is not greedy. Koa loves Alicia, and that's something that doesn't happen in Rivera's version. Alicia and her baby also somehow managed to escape the Amazon rainforest, creating an opposite sensation that the one that Rivera's vortex can create. Hope triumphs when the news of Alicia and the baby surviving breaks through. For this, the Green Nightmare was worth it. On the other hand, Rivera's outcome for his story is raw and ruthless. No one gets out of the Amazonas, not even the new mother and her child. And I'm going to conclude real quick because of the divergences that Pantoja includes in his version of the Vortex. The graphic novel could be considered rather as a fan fiction than an adaptation or a translation of literature to the comics medium. Pantoja creates his own Arturo Kowa from his script, from the very first line, to work to give the protagonist a redemption that eludes him in Rivera's novel. The fundamental transformations of the essence of the main character align with the possibility of a mitigation of the manipulative, selfish, and violent nature of Koa. Pantoja's adaptation includes a language modification, aiming for a current language that appears friendly to the public of his version of the Vortex. In this exercise, the original overtone and meaning of the original words and sentences written by Rivera were sacrificed. And I'm going to stop here because I don't want to take time for the other from Pablo and Cindy.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Camila, for this very interesting talk. I'm going to introduce Pablo while I think Pablo is setting up. And as I said, I have no Spanish background, so I'll be butchering some of those titles. So maybe, Pablo, you can give me a hand, or Felipe. So yes, as I said, thank you. Our next guest speaker is Pablo Guerre, and Pablo is co-author of Dos Aldos together with H. Diaz and the graphic novel adaptation of Rosario Tijeras. He published the documentary comics Recetario de Sabores Lejantes, Caminos Condenados, La Palisua.
La Palisua, yeah, good.
Palistúa, thank you. Ustedes no saben cómo ha sido esta lucha, together with Si Agüera. And Sin Más Palabra por los Caminos de Tulapas, together with Si Viejo. Is that understandable?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, good. In addition, he authored the press strips Vale y su Papa, along with H.D. Diaz, Los Perdidos, along with F. Neira, and El Draque, along with C. Sanchez and Rojenes. He is co-director of the Tala Distrital del Narrativa Gráfica de Idartes in Bogota, and editor-in-chief of the Cohetes Comics label. He is part of the cartoonist collective El Globoscopio, and his talk is entitled today, From Comics to Comics, Así con la variación en la tilde. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for putting up with my Spanish.
No, thank you. I'm glad I'm here. Well, here, wherever that place is, but okay, yeah. So my English is very rusty, but yeah, I've been trying to practice sort of the very specific pronunciation of the title of this short talk, trying to be very much aware of how, like, from comics to comics, right? So, because when you see it written, you can see that there's an accent mark, and that is sort of the way I try to structure sort of this talk, that is a summary of a journey. I mean, so yeah, we're here to celebrate or to commemorate or to think about, to reflect on the first 100 years of comics in Colombia. I have to be very honest, this celebration, I think it implies a challenge of, I mean, in an ideal world, this 100 years would mean we could just sit down and sort of look at how these 100 years have been studied and analyzed deeply by many different scholars from many different approaches. But the reality is that this 100 years, this celebration sort of reveals how much work we have to do, how little we have managed to sort of analyze and register. So this talk is sort of a mashup. It's not necessarily like an academic talk. It's more of like a personal journey through sort of things that are concerning to me, that are important to me, both as a researcher, but mostly as a creator and an editor, but also as somebody who thinks, I have to think of myself as part of a community of creators and different actors that are involved in comics creation and building sort of an identity, quote unquote, for Colombian comics. So, okay, let's start, because this, yeah, I don't want to waste more time on this sort of introduction. So the arc has to do with what's in a tilde, right? Comics is an Anglicism for Spanish, of course, but it sort of became a key word in America for the introduction of sort of a foreign way of communicating, of creating stories, and of course when it was implemented into Spanish, we had to, I mean, to follow the grammatical rules. It's written with an accent mark, and as you can see in this short excerpt from the Diccionario Panhispánico de Dudas from the Real Academia de la Lengua Española, there is this sort of reminder of how, although it is accepted as a word in Spanish, there's other words such as tira cómica, historieta, muñequitos, and there's this list of very different ways of different words you can use to sort of avoid Anglicism. And that was sort of like the rule, or the unspoken rule, around how to talk about comics from Latin America. And part of that journey to me became sort of important when I was naming my first blog many years ago on how to write the title. It was called Drake Comics. And I thought, should I write it with an accent mark or not? I didn't want it to call Drake Historietas or Drake Muñequitos. I wanted to call it comics because I really felt comics was a truthful word to me. So I decided to use it with an accent mark. I like the word comics, and I like the fact that it is an Anglicism, because I think it's more uncomfortable. It has, when you say it in Spanish, you're sort of breaking sort of you're making your discourse a little bit more uncomfortable. It's weird, and it needs to be weird. It needs to be uncomfortable, because I think that word sort of implies a journey. Okay, so I want to talk about sort of that. I mean, that sense of a word being uncomfortable sort of forces us to think it's not just about making comics, it's about sort of inventing our own way of making those comics, of thinking about those comics. And part of that has to do with rethinking definitions, right? For example, there's not a lot of papers about comics in Colombia, but there's one that became sort of very central, that it's an article by Daniel Rabanal that was published in Revista Latinoamericana de Estudios sobre la Historieta, which is an overview of sort of Colombian comics up to, I guess, the 90s. And in that article, as part of sort of what was out there, it's not just a singular decision from Rabanal. There's the sense that comics, in order for comics to be really important and matter, they have to sort of be popular, be widely distributed, to be strong, and sort of be connected to an industry. And I think on that journey from comics to comics, I think we need to rethink that definition, right? I don't necessarily have a straightforward new definition for this, because I think it's a journey. It's something that needs to be analyzed and reflected on and discussed with more people. But I do think that in order to really understand what has happened in Colombian comics for the last 100 years, we need to sort of find a better definition, right? And I think it's a definition that can actually be useful to understand comics outside of those central industries that have shaped comics, right? I'm talking about specifically American, North American, United States comics, French comics, for example, and Japanese manga, right? But what happens outside of those, big publishing industries? Maybe if we change that definition, we can look at what has happened in other countries in a different way. Okay, so a key part of this, it has to do with the Colombian audience, right? How you sort of, it's not only about wanting or creating a work of art, but it's also about how you can actually connect that with readers, right? And there is this sense of, how do we feel that? How for many decades, the idea was that Colombian comics had no audience, had no connection with the audience, which is something that gladly, I think, has changed. Okay, because one of the sort of temptations around creating comics from a place like Colombia is imitating the comics from the outside, right? For example, the American tradition, the United States tradition of the superhero, sort of making, okay, so if we're going to make Colombian comics, we're going to go ahead and make our superhero, a Colombian superhero, right? Cloning what comes from other countries, from stronger industries. But I think we can go way beyond that, because I don't know, there's more stuff to be made in order to really appropriate the language and establish a different type of dialogue with those central industries. We have to go further than that, right? Actually challenge a little bit more what the form entails, what those genre actually can be, how those genre can be actually transformed when we as Colombians sort of use it. And that has to do with sort of a double movement in terms of creating and researching. Early on in my career as a creator and as an editor, I realized that in order to create, to move forward, I needed to go backwards first. I needed to root my exploration of comics, my interest in comics, on the history of Colombian comics, which is a dangerous game. Or, I mean, dangerous game in the sense that, especially when you're a creator, you have this fear of maybe I'm inventing those roots, right? I'm not taking necessarily, like I'm taking small traces of sort of little excerpts or findings from the archive, and I'm sort of inventing a bigger thing, right? But that's a danger that hopefully as a creator I can take, but we'll see. So at the beginning of that process, there is Adolfo Samper. Adolfo Samper created Mohicon, which was, first published in 1924, which is sort of seen as sort of the first, and actually was the first Colombian comic book character that was published regularly, that created an audience, that sort of created that first set of expectations around comics when Mohicon was first published. Comics were not widely published in Colombian newspapers. Actually, I use this title of the original scene of Adolfo Samper because I mean, it sounds very biblical, but it makes sense, because this is not unique to the case of Mohicon or to the case of Colombia. Adolfo Samper traced the character of Smithy from the American press, and sort of by tracing it and translating it, created this new character called Mohicon. The same thing happened, for example, with Chapin, Paquin from Mexico, right? Which is another character from the same period that also used Smithy as a base to create a local character. Adolfo Samper, when he was asked about his work, said he never signed Mohicon because he felt it didn't belong to him, because he traced it. But when you look at it in the archives, and that's where maybe fantasy starts to interact with actual facts, but I mean, he literally traced the page, I don't know, a couple of months, but there's a point where he starts just creating like a collage of different sources to build or to keep on building the world of Mohicon, right? And that came, that process sort of became very, very clear to me when I found an issue from 1928, which is a color issue of the newspaper that features the first color page of Mohicon. It's impossible that this page was just traced, because it includes, I mean, the characters are walking around sort of the printing press where the newspaper was made, and they interact with the editor of the newspaper, and also they interact with Adolfo Samper himself, right? There's no way he just traced that. So there was a learning curve. There was a learning process where he took something that was already there, but he used the tracing as a way of learning, right? So it has to do with this question of how do you learn an art as an outsider, right? And for example, many years later in the 50s, Samper himself sort of reflected on that experience in Mundo al Día. This is another character of Adolfo Samper. This is Misia Escopeta. And in this particular strip, she's remembering the past, and she's actually remembering her life and mentioning and reading Mundo al Día, right? Remembering how Mundo al Día covered an experience from her past. So, I mean, I don't know. Adolfo Samper said he didn't feel he created Mohicon, but maybe in the same way Harvey Pekar portrays his life in The Quitter and how he portrays his life in Cleveland, maybe there's a gap there of how Adolfo Samper felt about his work on comics by the end of his life and how he reflected on it maybe in the 1950s. We will never know for a fact if there was a gap or a change of heart, but it's a burning question, an interesting question that maybe we can feel with fiction, or we can feel with our own sense of passion, but it's an interesting point. Moving on, and thinking about that question of how do you learn from as an outsider, there's another sort of key creator, that is Ernesto Franco. He learned to draw and to make comics from those courses by mail that were promoted in the 50s, in the 1960s, widely in Colombia. And he learned comics from there, and he created Copetin, which is another very interesting character. Copetin is a kid who lives in the streets, a homeless kid, and he based it on a real kid that he met while working on a restaurant. The interesting thing about this character, one of the things that are interesting to me about this character, is that he was published alongside the section of international comics. Okay, and this was a very uncomfortable character for the newspaper. The Copetin was published in El Tiempo, and when you research it, you see that Copetin is clearly a very, I mean, this is going to sound weird, but he feels foreign to the comic section of El Tiempo, okay? Because the other comics are adventure comics and humor comics. So they're talking about sort of extraordinary adventures or everyday life in sort of suburban, like non-places in the United States. And suddenly we have Copetin, which is the only comic that is actually talking about, you know, the local reality, a very hurtful and tragic reality of kids living in the streets, but it feels like an outsider, right? So when you compare it, for example, with Peanuts, or when you think about it and compare it with Mafalda, which are characters that are based on sort of that middle class world, this is also this sort of a kid that it's always sort of this witty kid, but he's talking a very harsh reality. through the lens of humor. And that, I mean, the fact that it's very uncomfortable sort of made it, I don't know. Oh, I have 2 more minutes, sorry. Okay, so I'm gonna try to round this up. But it's interesting, there was more to talk about there in those comics. So if you follow sort of that problematic relation with what the expectations of what local comics should be, one of sort of the ways to deal with this problem is sort of think Colombian comics should have a mission. They should be about history. They should be about sort of education. There's this very interesting case of the comics of Julian of Chalarca. We can talk about that afterwards. That also entails sort of that problem of should Colombian comics just have a mission, or should it just be about sort of exploring freely a topic by the creators? And there's this other key moment. I was a personal witness to sort of what happened from the 90s, from the 1990s on, where just comics became independent, self-published, and sort of that allowed for a new approach to sort of that idea that comics should always have a mission and should always be about positive things and educative things. And then there's this other key moment that sadly I didn't have managed to manage my time wisely, but there's this other key moment that I think it's entailed by Virus Tropical by Paola. And just to round it up, this process of going from comics to comics, I think has to do with how do we define this as a community, right? It's not a community where we like each other. It's not a community where we necessarily agree on how comics should be made, but we are a community that needs to be able to sort of understand our past and figure out basic rules to build a better future. So, okay, I think that was that. So many thanks.
Thank you so much, Pablo, for this great historical overview. I'm sure you could have talked for another 2 hours. Lots of stuff to say. So we're going to move on to Cindy Elefante, who's our 3rd guest speaker, and I think then we have Q&A. So Cindy was born in Bogota, Colombia on the Sunday afternoon in 1987, and I hope it was a sunny afternoon. She studied visual arts at the Universidad Javeriana in Bogota and later on completed a master's degree in children's book illustration at the Cambridge School of Art in England. She is the author of the graphic novel Elephants in the Room, published by Cojete Comics and reviewed as one of the best books in 2016 by Arcadia magazine. In addition, Cindy co-authored with Maria Alejandra Grillo and Pablo Guerra, who we just heard, a chapter of the comic Recetario de Sabores Lejanos, and the 2nd chapter, in 2020. And in the 2021, Cindy participated with 2 illustrations in the project Good Night Stories for Rebel Girls, Colombian Ecuador version, I think published by Planeta 2021. She has illustrated different books such as Professor Olaco 2021, editorial SM Colombia, Naricita Impertinente 2019, published by Idartes in the collection Libro al Viento, Seis Dedos 2020, editorial Norma. Chicas Asustosas y Además Hermosas 2019, editorial Siete Gatos, and Arrullos y Rimas para Niños Despiertos 2017 by editorial Norma. Her talk is entitled Reimagining Sex and Gender in Comics, Power Plumas. Thanks so much, Cindy. Oh, I think you're muted, Cindy.
Doesn't look muted, but we're not being able to hear you.
De pronto se tiene que quitar los audífonos.
Puedes tratar de quitarte los audífonos a ver si te oímos. Ok, desenchufarlos a ver si de pronto te oímos.
No.
No audio.
Do you think maybe you could try connecting through your phone or another device so that we can hear you? No, we can't
No.
hear you, but try joining through your phone if you can.
Thank you for your patience while we try to sort some technical problems.
There are still pan de bonos and coffee and hot chocolate over there, so please use this as a small pause to get a little bit of.
Can you hear me?
See,
Can you hear
that's
me?
better. Yes, that's better.
Okay,
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe we're gonna need you to speak loudly so that we can hear you here in person, because the acoustics are a little weird here.
Okay.
Cindy, it seems you muted yourself. Actually,
Yeah, I think you're muted.
Yeah.
Now, are you listening? No? Yes?
Yes.
Yes? Yes, thank you. Okay, are you looking at my presentation? Can you see?
Yeah.
No?
Well,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Nice to see you. Nice to listen to my friends and co-workers, and happy to be here. And this is like a pre-party to celebrate what is happening and what's been happening these days, these months and years in the comic. I'm going to change a little bit the subject. Please bear with me with my English is a little bit rusty as well, as Paulo said. And I'm going to talk a little bit about sex and gender in comics. And I would like to introduce you to Power Plumas, which is, I would say, I want to show you how this character or superhero was created. And we will see. So everything started with this graphic novel that Gabriel just mentioned. This was my first comic book published by Cohete Comics there in Bogota. The editor was Paulo. And this was a comic about identity and gender and about coming out of the closet. And I can talk another hour about this book, but this is not the main topic. The thing is that afterwards, after I published this book, and this was 2016 with Paulo, there was Camilo, Henry. I was doing my MA in Cambridge, and I came back to Colombia in 2016 to do this book, to publish this book. And straight away, I just start working with comics and illustration, and the topics I felt more comfortable, and that it was like a need for me was to talk about gender and identity, even though I was not 100% aware of what I was doing in the moment. But getting to know people like Daniel and Paulo and was important because they gave me the chance to publish my first comic strip in a newspaper in Colombia. That was the El Espectador, this newspaper here. And the first topic that I was commissioned to talk about was the Pride in 2016 in Colombia, because in that moment they were legalizing the equal marriage there. So I had to do like a critique of what was happening there. And that was my first comic strip. And I was like so into it, like so committed. And I felt like I needed to talk about this. So in the middle, since that was my first publication in the in the journal, in the middle, I met 2 other people, and I was introduced to this section in the newspaper that was in Entre Viñetas. In that section, I share a room with Paulo, with his comic strips and other artists, and we had for a couple of months we had the opportunity to publish these kind of things. So, and there was and I would say encuesta. I forgot how to say encuesta in English. Anyway, they did like a study of how kids were bullied in schools, but especially LGBTQ kids were bullied in schools. So I had the chance to work close with the results of the study, and we decided to make comics to show the studies and to show the results, and it was quite interesting. And it was it was very sad about what, get to know that information, that how kids are bullied by teachers, by other students, sometimes are bullied from families. Anyway, that was like a huge topic to talk about, and I was like really committed to that. I felt like I didn't feel like I was working like a job, but I felt like I was doing something I wanted to talk about. So in that way, while talking about that, I get to know Sentido. Sentido is an organization there in Colombia, and they work with diversity, gender. It's like an ONG, and I met Lina, and we work together doing these kind of things. And also with Entre Viñetas, with the newspaper. So we were more or like a team, where Lina was like kind of the expert and the one that was like showing me how to talk, and show me definitions, and give me like a path and information to understand what is gender. At the same time, I was like understanding myself and drawing about it. It was like a whole process. So we did more projects and more publications on the newspaper about, in this case, was about conflict, and how the victims of the conflict were, one of the main targets were women, and how it was like a strategy in war in Colombia. But anyway, so in that context, I also had the chance to create, for 4 months, I had the chance to work for Entre Viñetas and make my own comic strip. And most of my work is kind of autobiographical. Like my first book, it was about coming out, and I just felt that I wanted to keep talking about that. I felt like I wanted to talk about how we talk about gender, how we talk about other women, how we recognize ourselves, about identity, or just in this case, this comic strip was just about how we refer to other people just by speaking, just how to change one word or one joke can have an impact on people. And I was like, this first one was about being critique about myself and how I used to talk about women and boys. And anyway, so in that point and afterwards, we talk about, I don't know, for example, the use of colors to differentiate between girls and boys, about gender, how pink is related to woman, about being delicate, and all those topics began to stuck in my mind. And as I said, they were in my mind because I was also like thinking about myself, how to identify myself as a lesbian, as a tomboy, how it was, it could be socially punished, but at the same time, I'm just like, I want to be brave and talk about it, and to show myself and be strong about it, and resist the criticism. And in that, we kind of did like a really strong partnership with Sentido, with Lina and her organization, and we start to keep working. And the focus of that ONG or that organization is literally LGBT, gender, sex topics. So we start to create content. We did videos, we did GIFs, we did good for us and for me that they saw in comics the chance to with social media, with Instagram, with the slides, we saw the opportunity to talk about these topics in social media, and how these slides in Instagram kind of, for me, it's like it helped a lot the language of comic and these kind of sweeping slides. So with that organization, we create a lot of content always around those kind of topics. And I was happy, and I think people was receiving it, the content, very well. And we got an engagement, and it was a really, it's still today is like one of the topics I like to think, to draw, and to talk. And for 2018, because we were already friends, they wanted to create, the truth is that they wanted to do some t-shirts for the Pride in 2019, and they asked me to create a character, and I did this guy here. In that moment, that was just a unicorn, and they did also like a campaign. The campaign was to, sometimes when you, I don't know, if you work in a company, sometimes you gossip and you say, can you tell that one is gay? Can you tell that she's gay? This is not politically right, but you can hear those kind of chats in companies or in different environments. So with Sentido, they did a campaign about saying, yes, you can tell that I am gay, I am proud of it. So that's when we created this guy, this unicorn, and this unicorn became something like a t-shirt, and the t-shirt turned it out into, it was like people was really like, oh, we love this t-shirt, and it turned out to be a pin and stickers and postals, and suddenly they decided they wanted to animate this unicorn and give it a name, like give it like a whole story for this unicorn. So for 1 year, we kind of kept working, doing other contents about, we worked together for prides, for every time I had the chance to talk about gender, and this case was about, this was a contribution to a magazine in Chile, Revista Brígida magazine. And every time I had the chance to talk, if I can choose the topic to talk about, I will choose something related to gender or to sex or to identity. And this was happening in the meantime. And at the same time, they told me, okay, we want to give this unicorn a voice. We want to make him a superhero. And this, we did a video. You can check the QR code there. They have Sentido has a YouTube channel where you can check all the content. And we did this first chapter, animated chapter of the unicorn, and we give it a name to him. It was Power Plumas. And so this was the main interest of Power Plumas as a superhero. And it was a campaign against bullying LGBTQ trans kids. It was a process of, I think, was like 4 months, thinking about the script, thinking about the story, thinking about how Power Plumas would look like. And it was a success in that moment, so we did another video. But it happens to be that making animation is quite hard. It's too much. Like doing 1 minute animation was a lot of work. I was working with a friend, that's important. Natalia Rojas was my friend. We worked together in this. We both did the animation, the music, not the music, but we edited the video. We did everything, but it was too much work for just 1 minute, and that it was also expensive. And then 1 year later, almost, they decided, okay, it's taking too much time. We can switch to comics. And in September 2020, Power Plumas became officially like a comic strip. And basically, we talk about he is like a superhero that is always standing there for defending minorities, for defending lesbians, that's fighting for trans people, that is fighting for LGBTQ people. It's just like a, you know, LGBT superhero that kind of we wanted to be there. And it's been a process. I like to, when I work with Power Plumas, I try to put a little bit of myself, of my experiences, but also sometimes I try to talk about things that are happening in that moment, in that context. And so we try to also like target specific dates. So for example, this was for the bisexual day. So we kind of put topics about that, and we debate what can you talk about it, what is bisexuality. And in November, for example, that was like there was a date for remembering trans people lives, so we did like a comic about that. And we try to always think of the context and the story, and it's also it's not just me. I want to say that Power Plumas is like a child for me. I am one mother, but he's got another 3 mothers. That it's my friend Natalia and the 2 ladies, the 2 women from Sentido, because we all the time kind of work together. We think the story. They do a proposal. They say the topic is this. Then I kind of think of a storyboard, and we debate, and then we kind of put it together. But the part of the drawing, it's all done by myself. So in the path, we've been adding other characters. So a couple of months later, they asked me to do like another character that was Ali. That of course it stands for as an ally, and it was a zebra, and we work all the process, and sometimes you can find Ali in the comics as well. So we started to develop other characters, and he stands for Alice in the stories. And we also, like, one of the last posts or the last comics that I did, okay, there is Ali and his family, and this idea was one of the Sentidos from Maria Mercedes. She wanted to develop another character that is the Chiquiros. That it's, I don't know what's the word for Chiquiros in English. But anyway, it's like they are a couple of queer characters, so they are non-binary, and it's like a game sound in English and in Spanish, to Chiquiro and Chiquiro. And we keep kind of working and talking about those topics. So Power Plumas is still there, and he kind of now lives there. We want to keep it, and we want to keep working and making stories. The last story, I didn't draw the story. It was done by my friend Natalia. But again, I want him to keep it alive and to keep bringing this kind of I was not very specific about the topics, but I just a little bit short time to I wanted to give you an idea of how Power Plumas was done and how it was created. And if I spoke too fast, you can I don't know, you can ask questions. I want to give people questions, and maybe if I rush it a little bit, but was worried about the time.
Okay, so thank you so much, Cindy. I think that Felipe is taking over now, maybe with Q&A, because I can see anyone. But thank you so much, all of you 3, for very interesting and very inspiring talks. Makes me want to read Colombian comics right now.
Thank you.
I got your connections, Kelly. Thank you, everyone. And while people think about their questions, I just want to remind everyone that we have some of Pablo's and Cindy's comics rotating so that you can see them here. Also on the wall and in the interactive room, you can see the projections of their comics if you want to take a look. And for our live stream audiences, you can see their work also on the website, on our website, where we have the slideshow with their work. And we'll take questions from Santi. Are you monitoring the chat either in YouTube? Okay, we'll take questions through the YouTube chat if you're remote, and also from our in-person audience.
I'm not sure if they address this.
Do you mind coming here to ask them so that they can hear you? Gracias, Mercedes.
Okay. I got here late, so I don't know if you addressed this, but who reads these comics? Who is the yeah, who reads them?
Who what?
Who is the audience?
Who's the
Los
audience?
lee.
Creo que hemos que todos una pregunta, me imagino para los cómics de Cindy.
¿Para todos o para?
I think Paulo is the right person for this question.
For the who reads these comics? That's a question I ask myself all the time as an editor. No, I mean, I think for a long while, most Colombian comics were just read by other Colombian comics creators. No, but I mean, the reality is from sort of the last 20 years, maybe a little bit more, there's a growing audience that it's following creators and sort of, yeah, allowing this market or to be viable, and it's growing. I mean, actually, it can be sort of like an anecdote, but when I started editing or thinking about editing books, I sort of assumed nobody was going to buy them. So I really didn't account for sort of how to work if things sold out or if people actually bought those books. And to my surprise, some books actually sold out. So it's interesting. And in terms of maybe like the demographics, it's mostly, I think, for Cohete, I think it's people from, I don't know, 20 years old, 30 years old. It's women and men, and I don't know. It's a very interesting group of people. Some of them are longtime comics readers. Some people don't really care about comics until they find something that is actually interesting to them. But it's a growing number.
I don't know if Cindy and Camila have any thoughts about that question.
No, I think Paulo did reply well.
I know that Camila, among other things, has this very popular YouTube channel where she talks about comics. So maybe she can address the question in terms of who watches the YouTube channels that talk about comics.
I have no idea. No, I know my dad watches the videos.
Yeah, I watch
But
them too.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know exactly what the audience is.
Oh, okay, well, there we have one of the topics for the next 100 years.
I like comics.
Any other questions?
Maybe I like to add something to it.
Yes,
and
please, Cindy.
sometimes I think I feel surprised that some people get to know my book without being like a comic person, you know. It's just like I just say, you know, I have a book about identity, about, I think the path is different. Like sometimes I just talk about gender and coming out of the closet, and people will get there by the topic and not necessarily because of I want to read a comic about this. It's just, well, I think some of the people I've met that have read my comic, I found them in that path. Maybe that's the only thing. Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah, I think that's a key thing, right? Like maybe, I mean, there's of course so you already like comics, so we'll give you more. But I think part of the exercise of the last decade has been creating comics for different audiences, and that has turned out really interesting because yeah, people get there, get to the books without necessarily following sort of that preconceived trail.
And I think Paulo Perez was talking a little bit about that in the last panel this morning, about how, yeah, there's different paths that can take you there. You might be reading it because of the topic, or because you like the drawings, or because you like the stories, and etc. Do we have any other questions? Yes, there's a question online.
Yeah, sure. So this question comes from Joan Guzman, and it reads, I do have a question for Cindy regarding the target audience. You want to reach parents or children, specifically in gender topics?
And I love to target everyone, you know. But I want to be honest as well. Like, for example, sometimes I also myself have a little bit of prejudice more with parents than with kids, you know. Like sometimes I just want to say in front of I don't know, audience. I am more afraid to say that in front of parents because of the prejudice that I am a lesbian, I'm a tomboy, and I feel a little bit more the prejudice from parents than for kids. I think for kids, they don't, you know, they just like go smoothly, they don't have too much preconcept. And I think it's a little bit not necessarily harder, but it's more, you need to push a little bit stronger with grown adults than with children. With children, you can find metaphors or you know, examples with animals, and it's more easygoing. With parents, the core, the education core, especially when it's like a traditional one, is you know, it's harder. So, and it's complicated, but it's a huge challenge there.
Challenge accepted. Yeah. I think this.
I actually have a question to follow up on that, which is like, I think in the US, when we talk a lot about like homophobia and things like that, we talk about communities, like religious communities and things like that, of people who are like, oh, it's bad because it's in the Bible or things like that. But I feel like in my experience personally with like Colombians, it's also like this idea of like tradition and how things should be. And I wanted to hear a little bit about like how your experience has been writing about these topics, because these are not conversations that, like, let's say I would have with my grandmother or something of that sort. And so I want to also hear from like that perspective, like bridging those types of conversations and how you think it differs and how you would characterize like homophobia in that way in Colombia and Latin America. Thank you.
Oh, for in the case of elephants in the room, it was really complicated since the very beginning. Even myself, when I was kind of doing the book, I was kind of putting the book in the closet. I didn't want it to be so public about it. I think it was a huge debate for myself. So with my family, it was even harder. But it's been a really nice process, especially with my mom, because I used to live with her, and she's been there all the process about coming out. And I always said, now I say that I come out, but my mom also has to come out to, you know, she doesn't want, I kind of push her, like, not to lie to her friends. Like, if they ask you if I have a boyfriend, you say no, you say I have a girlfriend, that I am a lesbian. And she's like struggling with that, and she felt panic. But nowadays is a little bit easier, but it's been a whole process. We kind of debate, and it's been nice because she's kind of open sometimes, and we debate, but we always come back and we manage to talk. But it's not the same way with other members of my family. I don't know, my aunts, they are very, very traditional, and I think each person has to pick its fights, you know. If it's somebody, it's a family that I do care and love as my mom, I will like try to keep going and grow with her. But if it's a cousin that I don't like, that lives in another city and that we are not that close, it's not my friend, we are family, but it's not my friend. I don't care about him that much, so I won't put that much struggle with that. So it depends. I think you should pick your fights and leave other, I would say, mediums, media, or strategies to fight with common people, if it makes sense.
Thank you so much, Cindy, and thank you, Paulo. Thank you, Camila. Muchísimas gracias. Thanks to our in-person audiences and also our audiences online. We are going to have a short pause and we will continue in a few minutes with another English language panel, another hybrid panel, but we have two of our presenters right here, Catalina Cheng and Angie Bonilla, and we'll have Camilo Aguirre online. Thank you very much, and I'll see all of you later in the round table.
All right.